I'm always a little frustrated when a story just stops. It doesn't end. And we get that in the scripture lesson today, where Jesus is telling a parable of the fig tree, but we don't get the punchline. We just have it kind of left hanging there. So let's go back a little bit and look at the scripture that we're looking at today, because this is the third week of Lent. So all the scriptures are meant to have us look at our faith a little bit deeper, find a little more meaning in it than perhaps we found before. And Jesus starts off talking about teaching about two events in history: a massacre that happened at the temple and a tower destruction in Siloam, that is at the southwest tip of Jerusalem. Now, neither of these events have any historic record, so we don't know what the story was behind all of that. And that's not completely new in doing it when we're doing ancient studies, because they didn't have newspapers, they didn't have nightly news or anything like that. So these stories must not have left enough of an impression to be named by anyone outside of Luke. It does not mean they didn't happen, just that there's no way to corroborate that, and that's just the reality of working with ancient history. So we have these two events, and Jesus is asking his followers, were the people who died, were they particularly sinful, and that was their punishment? It was generally assumed at that time that if bad things happened to you, it's because you did bad things and God was punishing you. And this was not just a Hebrew understanding. The Romans believed this, the Greeks believed this, Egyptian believed this, Persians, like everybody. This is a basic attitude towards God's involvement with humans, that they were punished because of their action. That's one of the radical things about Jesus, how he came to say that's not how God is. That's an assumption. That's a pretty traditional way of looking at things, but that's not how God reacts. And he was trying to get them to see that just because these horrible things happened, they didn't deserve them. It was not some kind of punishment. Pilate and the engineers, whoever brought that temple down, were not acting on God's behalf when these bad things happened. And we've got to stop looking at bad things as if they're justified, or conversely, that they are acts of nature or explainable, and that the people involved were not the nasty nasties that were doing this. We have a tendency in Western culture, especially if the perpetrator of horrible things is white, to just dismiss them as mental illness or emotional breakdown or whatever. We don't give that latitude to people who with different skin types. So it's something we do primarily to white people, but we always give them an excuse for their nasty behavior. And Jesus is saying, no, none of that. They're not God's agents. They're not doing anything. They're just mean. They're just nasty. They didn't do anything to these people because it had to happen. These things happened, and they were awful, and we mourn them, and it's terrible. But don't take any other lesson out of that. This is not God acting in the world. This was not a punishment that they were given. And then Jesus goes on to tell about a parable. He talks about a landowner who owned fig trees. Now, a fig tree was a rather pricey thing to own. So the person who owned this was probably quite wealthy, had a lot of dispendable value in his land and his places. So the life of one fig tree really wouldn't bother him too much. And the way fig trees were farmed at that point in time is it took 3 years for them to grow to maturity. It took another 3 years for them to grow to maturity in fruiting, and then a 3-year window to actually produce fruit. Then the tree would be dug out, a new one would be planted, and the cycle would start all over again. So 9 years to get 3 years worth of produce is a lot of effort and trust and commitment. And Jesus talks about this owner coming to this tree and saying, just pull it out. It hasn't done anything. It's at the end of its cycle. Just get rid of it. We'll do something else. But the caretaker says, just give it another year. Let me dig around it. Let me treat it properly. Let me do something and see if next year it can bear fruit. If not, I agree. It's gone. But let me try. And that's where we're left. This is all working to help us understand faith. Faith is not something that just happens to us. Faith is something we have to work at. Like that fig tree, it doesn't matter how much we grow to maturation in the structure of the church, how much we follow the rules and expectation that we go to Sunday school, go to youth group, attend worship. None of that is going to bear fruit in us, and that's a metaphor for faith. None of it is going to bear fruit if we don't put in the work, if others around don't put in the work for each other, if adults don't put in the work for children before they know how to, that adults don't put in the work of helping teenagers when they've got questions and they're not convinced that this what we're talking about in church is really all that and answering their questions, that there might be something else that they value more. If we're not going to put in the work to nurture ourselves and each other, we might as well be tossed, because we have not done anything with the development of our faith. And that's usually a hard one for church people to hear, because in our society we are told that a life of faith looks like we do X number of prayers, we attend X number of services, we have this type of behavior, this type of wardrobe. And that's never faith. That's what society has put on as a way of containing people in the church. Because quite honestly, if we were to follow the lessons of Jesus, we'd be tearing things down. We'd be making a mess. We would be challenging authority every single day. We'd be making it very, very uncomfortable for the rich and powerful. We don't do that because we have manicured our faith into little boxes of behavior that end up being rather fruitless. Is it any wonder that successive generations don't find any meaning in Christianity, in their faith? I look at my own children. As adults, they're sort of starting to engage in the concept again. But when they were children, and I was the only one nurturing them, they didn't have that expectation. They didn't have that understanding that as Christians we're meant to be something more. They got very limited instruction. And it's not that these people were not genuinely trying to do things. They themselves were limited in what faith could look like. And we tend to go towards the social engagement with each other rather than pushing the establishment to do more things, pushing the rich and the powerful to be better about using resources. It's an uncomfortable conversation, because we are still kind of back in that day, back in that ancient belief that if bad things happen, that somehow we brought it about ourselves. This whole concept of merit, that those who succeeded were somehow morally superior and made better choices, that those who fail didn't work hard enough, didn't put in enough effort, didn't put in enough time. When any economist in the world can show you the hardest working people are actually the poorest people, and that the richest people, the one that have the bounty, don't really work that much. They just had a lot to start with. We as Christians, our total faith is challenging that system, that assumption of merit, that bad people get bad things happening to them and we just kind of rub our hands free and walk away and saying, sorry, you brought that on yourself. We can't do anything about that. Bad things are going to continue to happen. Trees are going to continue to not produce fruit, but the potential is there at any time, all the time. We put work into our faith, we put work into our social expression of faith. And I'm not talking coffee time, I'm talking getting out there, asking questions, trying to make it better for others. When we do that kind of nurturing work, the community of God expands. More people are included. People see that Christians actually stand for what they say they stand for, and they're attracted to our tradition because our tradition tells people they have value. It doesn't tell them that they're bad people. That's social assumptions that we've picked up over the years. That's baggage that we have to get rid of. That's not what our faith is supposed to look like. We're supposed to be nurturing those who don't know much about our tradition and help them to see who we really are. We're supposed to challenge those who misrepresent us or misrepresent other people or try to do this whole litany of what God likes and what God doesn't like. And it's a waste of their effort, but it's a waste of ours if we don't step up and say something. We're left with this open-ended story, kind of the stop rather than the conclusion. We have to provide that conclusion. We have to figure out, did that tree produce fruit that 10th year? Did it break all the records? Did it push beyond its assumed boundaries? Did the person who nurtured it, took care of it, did it make a difference? Would it matter anyway? Because if the tree wasn't producing? Was there not anything anyone could have done? We don't know. It's open. We can find our own conclusions in so many possible ways, but the takeaway is the effort needed to be put in. This tree could not be left alone and hope to prosper. Just like humans cannot be left alone and hope to understand God's love for them, especially in a world where Christianity has been so badly represented in so many places. We as followers, we as people who have been transformed by the messages of Christ, have to now live it out. We have to be those nurturers. We have to be those people that say, no, bad things, you didn't deserve this. You didn't happen to create this. You aren't being punished because of who you are. Stuff just happens. But we can be something else now. We can move on to something else. The lesson to be learned from those destructive things that happened to the Galileans was not that God was punishing them, but it's that we have a God who is going to be there with us in the moments and help us figure out ways to prevent them from happening again. That's the superpower of Christianity. Getting in there, making a difference, standing up for what we believe, being open to everybody, creating a place where everybody is welcome, not setting up any barriers or boundaries or assumptions. That's Christianity. And that's what on this Lenten journey we're supposed to dig into, dig a little deeper into. Is this how I'm living my Christianity? On my Lenten journey, can I do more? Should I do more? Am I able to do more? Is there too much happening in my life to limit doing more? Is that a good enough excuse to not be doing more? We have to decide how closely we're going to journey with Jesus as social change is happening. The fig tree might produce fruit the 10th year. We got to find out.